A 3-year-old girl who had never spoken a single word suddenly breaks her silence in a crowded diner, pointing at a stranger and uttering the impossible. She saved me. Her father, one of the most feared men in Chicago, watches in shock as his daughter's first words unravel a mystery that will force him to confront the darkest corners of his empire and discover that salvation can come from the most unexpected places. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what part of the world you're listening from. The rain came down in sheets over Chicago's south side, hammering against the windows of the black SUV as it rolled through the wet streets. Inside, Vincent Kane sat in the back seat, his daughter Lily pressed against his side, her small fingers clutching the fabric of his charcoal suit jacket. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and red through the rain-slicked glass, and the rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers filled the silence between them. Vincent was a man who commanded rooms without raising his voice. At 42, he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had built an empire from nothing and defended it with calculated ruthlessness. His dark hair was touched with silver at the temples, and his gray eyes held the kind of coldness that made grown men look away. He wore his power like a second skin, tailored suits, Italian leather shoes, a watch that cost more than most people's cars. But when he looked down at Lily, something in those eyes softened, just a fraction. She was 3 years old and had never spoken a word. The doctors had run every test imaginable. Neurologists, speech therapists, child psychologists, they all said the same thing. Physically, there was nothing wrong with her. No damage to her vocal cords, no neurological abnormalities. She simply chose not to speak. Selective mutism, they called it. Though Vincent suspected it was something deeper, something that had taken root the night her mother died 2 years ago, when the world had turned violent and incomprehensible for a child too young to understand. Vincent had been at a meeting across town when it happened. A rival crew had sent a message, and Elena had been the target. By the time he arrived, the house was a crime scene, and Lily was found hiding in a closet, silent and wide-eyed, her mother's blood on her tiny hands. She hadn't made a sound since. The SUV pulled up outside Rosie's Diner, a modest establishment tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop on West 47th Street. It wasn't the kind of place Vincent usually frequented. His world was penthouse restaurants and private clubs, but Lily had developed a strange attachment to this place. Every Thursday evening, without fail, she would tug at his hand and lead him here. He never understood why, but he indulged her. It was one of the few things that seemed to bring her any peace. His driver, Marcus, opened the door, and Vincent stepped out into the rain, lifting Lily into his arms. She buried her face against his neck, and he felt the familiar ache in his chest, the helplessness of a man who could control everything except the one thing that mattered most. Inside, the diner smelled of coffee and grilled onions. The vinyl booths were patched with duct tape, and the linoleum floor was scuffed from decades of foot traffic. A handful of customers sat scattered throughout, a couple of truck drivers at the counter, an elderly woman nursing a cup of tea by the window, a young man hunched over a laptop in the corner. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, unforgiving glow. Vincent carried Lily to their usual booth in the back, the one with a clear view of the entrance. Old habits. He set her down gently, and she immediately reached for the crayons and paper the staff always left for her. She began to draw in silence, her small hand moving in careful, deliberate strokes. A waitress approached, and Vincent glanced up. Her name tag read, Nora. She was young, mid-20s maybe, with auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail and green eyes that held a quiet warmth. She wore the standard uniform of the diner, a white blouse, black slacks, and a green apron tied at the waist. There was something unassuming about her, something that made her easy to overlook in a crowd. But Lily always watched her with an intensity that Vincent couldn't quite explain. "Evening, Mr. Kane," Nora said, her voice soft but steady. She had learned his name weeks ago, though he'd never offered it. "The usual for you both?" Vincent nodded. "Coffee, black, and the grilled cheese for her." Nora smiled down at Lily, who was still drawing, her head bent low over the paper. "How are you tonight, sweetheart?" Lily didn't look up, but her hand paused for just a moment before continuing. Vincent had seen this before, the way his daughter seemed to respond to Nora in ways she didn't with anyone else. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Nora didn't seem bothered by the silence. She simply nodded and moved away, weaving between the tables with practiced ease. Vincent watched her go, then turned his attention back to Lily. She was drawing a house, he realized. 4 walls, a triangular roof, a door, and 2 windows. She drew it over and over, each time with slight variations. Sometimes there were flowers in the yard. Sometimes there was a sun in the sky. But the house was always the same. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he pulled it out. A text from his second-in-command, Tony. "We need to talk. Problem with the shipment." Vincent's jaw tightened. There was always a problem. The business he ran, the one that paid for the penthouse, the cars, the private schools, was built on a foundation of constant vigilance. One misstep, one moment of weakness, and everything could come crashing down. He had enemies on every side, men who would kill him without hesitation if given the chance. And now, with Lily, the stakes were higher than ever. He typed back, "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Nora returned with the coffee and the grilled cheese, setting them down with a quiet efficiency. Lily picked up a triangle of the sandwich and took a small bite, her eyes still fixed on her drawing. "She's a good artist," Nora said, glancing at the paper. "That's a beautiful house." Vincent looked at the drawing again, and for the first time, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. In the window of the house, there was a small figure, a child, and next to the child, barely visible, was another figure, taller, an adult. "Who's that?" he asked, pointing to the second figure. Lily didn't answer. She never did. Nora leaned in slightly, studying the drawing. "Maybe someone she feels safe with," she said quietly, almost to herself. Vincent's eyes snapped to her, but Nora had already straightened, her expression neutral. She moved away to tend to another table, leaving him with the weight of her words. The rain continued to fall outside, and the diner hummed with the low murmur of conversation. Vincent sipped his coffee, the bitter taste grounding him, and watched as Lily finished her sandwich and returned to her drawing. The house, the child, the figure in the window. He didn't know what it meant, but something in his gut told him it mattered. An hour later, as they prepared to leave, Vincent noticed a man at the counter. He was young, early 20s, with a nervous energy that set off alarms in Vincent's mind. The man kept glancing toward their booth, his hand twitching near the pocket of his jacket. Vincent's instincts kicked in. He stood slowly, positioning himself between the man and Lily. Marcus, who had been waiting by the door, caught his eye and moved closer. The man stood abruptly, his hand diving into his jacket. Vincent's hand went to the gun holstered beneath his suit jacket, his body coiled and ready. But before anything could happen, Nora stepped between them, a pot of coffee in her hand. "Refill?" she asked the man, her voice bright and oblivious. The man froze, his hand still in his jacket. For a moment, the entire diner seemed to hold its breath. Then slowly, he pulled his hand out, empty, and shook his head. "No, thanks." He threw a few bills on the counter and walked out, the bell above the door chiming as he disappeared into the rain. Vincent exhaled slowly, his hand still on his gun. He looked at Nora, who was calmly pouring coffee for another customer, as if nothing had happened. But he saw the slight tremor in her hand, the way her jaw was set just a little too tight. She had seen it, she had known, and she had stepped in. Vincent picked up Lily, who was clutching her drawing, and carried her toward the door. As he passed Nora, he paused. "Thank you," he said, his voice low. Nora looked up, her green eyes meeting his. "For the coffee?" "For the coffee," he agreed. But they both knew what he really meant. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the city lights reflected off the wet pavement like scattered jewels. Vincent settled Lily into the SUV, and as Marcus pulled away from the curb, he glanced back at the diner. Through the window, he could see Nora wiping down a table, her movements calm and methodical. Something had shifted tonight. He didn't know what, but he felt it. A crack in the carefully constructed walls he had built around his life. And for the first time in 2 years, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward he hadn't considered. Lily leaned against him, her drawing clutched in her small hands, and Vincent wrapped his arm around her. The house, the child, the figure in the window. He would find out what it meant. He had to. The following morning, Vincent sat in his office on the 32nd floor of a steel and glass tower overlooking Lake Michigan. The room was all sharp lines and muted colors, black leather, chrome fixtures, floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city like a painting. It was a space designed to intimidate, and it served its purpose well. Tony sat across from him, a thick folder open on the desk between them. Tony was in his late 40s, a stocky man with a shaved head and a scar that ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone. He had been with Vincent since the beginning, back when they were just two kids from the South Side with more ambition than sense. Now, he was the closest thing Vincent had to a friend, though neither of them would ever use that word. The shipment was intercepted, Tony said, his voice flat. Beds grabbed it at the port. Someone tipped them off. Vincent's expression didn't change, but his fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. Who? We're working on it. But whoever it was, they knew the route, the timing, everything. It was someone on the inside. Vincent leaned back in his chair, his mind already running through the possibilities. Betrayal was an occupational hazard in his line of work, but it never got easier. Trust was a currency he couldn't afford to spend freely, and every time someone broke it, the cost was measured in blood. Find them, he said, and make an example. Tony nodded and closed the folder. There's something else. Word on the street is that the Italians are making moves. They think we're vulnerable. Vincent's jaw tightened. The Italians, specifically the Moretti family, had been a thorn in his side for years. They controlled the North Side, and they'd been looking for an excuse to expand into his territory. If they sensed weakness, they would strike. Let them think what they want, Vincent said. But make sure our people are ready. I want eyes on every corner, every warehouse. If they so much as breathe in our direction, I want to know about it. Tony stood, tucking the folder under his arm. You got it, boss. As Tony left, Vincent turned his chair to face the window. The city stretched out before him, a sprawling maze of steel and concrete. Somewhere down there, in the narrow streets and crowded neighborhoods, was the man who had betrayed him. And somewhere down there, in a modest diner on West 47th Street, was a waitress who had stepped between him and danger without hesitation. He couldn't stop thinking about her. It wasn't attraction, at least not in the way most men would define it. It was something else. Curiosity, maybe, or recognition. There was a calmness about her, a quiet strength that reminded him of Elena. His late wife had been like that, unshakable, even in the face of chaos. It was one of the reasons he had fallen in love with her. But Elena was gone, and Vincent had learned the hard way that love was a liability in his world. It made you soft. It gave your enemies a target. Still, he couldn't ignore the way Lily responded to Nora. His daughter, who had been locked in silence for 2 years, seemed to come alive in that diner. It was subtle. A glance, a pause, a slight shift in her posture. But it was there. And Vincent would do anything, sacrifice anything, to bring his daughter back. That evening he took Lily to the diner again. It wasn't Thursday, their usual day, but he told himself it was because she needed the routine. The truth, which he didn't want to admit, was that he needed to see Nora again, to understand what it was about her that reached his daughter in ways no one else could. The diner was busier than usual, filled with the after-work crowd. Nora moved between the tables with the same quiet efficiency, balancing plates and refilling coffee cups. She didn't notice them at first, and Vincent found himself watching her, studying the way she interacted with the customers. She smiled easily, laughed at their jokes, but there was a guardedness in her eyes, a distance she maintained even as she played the role of the friendly waitress. She was hiding something. He was sure of it. When she finally approached their booth, her expression brightened. "Back so soon?" she said, her eyes flicking to Lily. "I'm glad to see you, sweetheart." Lily looked up from her crayons, and for a moment, Vincent could have sworn he saw the ghost of a smile on her face. "The usual?" Nora asked. "Please," Vincent said. As Nora walked away, Vincent leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Do you like her?" he asked Lily softly. Lily didn't respond, but she picked up a green crayon and began to draw. This time, it wasn't a house. It was a person, a woman with long hair and a kind face. Vincent's chest tightened. "Is that Nora?" Lily's hand paused, and she looked up at him with those wide, dark eyes that saw too much. Then she went back to drawing, adding details, a smile, a hand reaching out. When Nora returned with the food, Vincent made a decision. "Can I ask you something?" Nora set down the plates and looked at him, her expression cautious. "Sure. How long have you worked here?" "About 6 months," she said. "Why?" "Just curious." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "My daughter. She doesn't talk. Hasn't since her mother died. But she seems comfortable here. With you." Nora's expression softened, and she glanced at Lily, who was eating her grilled cheese in small, deliberate bites. "She's a sweet kid," Nora said quietly. "I'm glad she feels safe here." Do you have kids? Vincent asked. Nora hesitated, and he saw something flicker in her eyes. Pain, maybe, or regret. No, she said finally. But I've always liked them. There was more to that story, Vincent was certain. But before he could press further, a commotion erupted near the front of the diner. A man was shouting, his voice slurred with alcohol, and the other customers were starting to back away. Vincent's instincts kicked in immediately. He stood, positioning himself between the man and Lily, his hand instinctively moving toward the gun beneath his jacket. But Nora was already moving. She walked calmly toward the man, her hands raised in a placating gesture. Hey, it's okay, she said, her voice steady. Let's just take a breath, all right? The man swayed on his feet, his eyes unfocused. I just want some food, he mumbled. Of course, Nora said. Come on, let's get you a seat. She guided him to a booth near the back, away from the other customers, and signaled to the cook. Within minutes, she had diffused the situation, and the diner returned to its normal hum of activity. Vincent watched her, impressed despite himself. She had handled the situation with a calm authority that most people didn't possess. It was the kind of composure that came from experience, the kind that made him wonder what she had seen, what she had survived. When she returned to their booth, he said, You're good at that. Nora shrugged, wiping her hands on her apron. You learn to read people in this job. I imagine you do, Vincent said. He paused, then added, Thank you, for last night. Nora met his eyes, and for a moment, the mask slipped. He saw the exhaustion there, the weight of something she was carrying. I didn't do anything, she said. You did, Vincent said, and I don't forget things like that. Nora held his gaze for a moment longer, then nodded and walked away. As Vincent and Lily left the diner that night, he felt the pieces of a puzzle beginning to come together. Nora wasn't just a waitress. She was someone with a past, someone who understood danger and knew how to navigate it, and somehow, she had become a lifeline for his daughter. He didn't know what it meant yet, but he intended to find out, because in Vincent Kane's world, nothing happened by accident. And if Nora was in their lives, it was for a reason. He just had to figure out what that reason was. Vincent's world began to unravel on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after he first noticed the connection between Lily and Nora. It started with a phone call from Tony, his voice tight with urgency. We found the rat, Tony said. It was Polly. Vincent's grip on the phone tightened. Polly had been with them for 5 years, a low-level enforcer who had always seemed loyal. You're sure? Positive. We traced the leak back to him. He's been feeding information to the feds for months. And that's not all. He's been talking to the Morettis, too. Vincent closed his eyes, the weight of the betrayal settling over him like a heavy cloak. Where is he now? We've got him at the warehouse on Cicero, waiting for your word. I'll be there in 20, Vincent said, and ended the call. He looked across the room to where Lily sat on the floor, surrounded by her drawings. She had been drawing more lately, filling page after page with houses, trees, and people, and in almost every picture, there was the same figure, a woman with long hair and a kind face, Nora. Vincent's housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, sat nearby, knitting quietly. She was a woman in her 60s, efficient and discreet, and she had been with the family since Lily was born. I need to go out, Vincent said. I'll be back in a few hours. Mrs. Chen nodded without looking up. We'll be fine. Vincent knelt beside Lily and kissed the top of her head. She didn't look up from her drawing, but she leaned into him slightly, and he felt the familiar ache in his chest. I'll be back soon, sweetheart, he said softly. The warehouse on Cicero was a nondescript building in an industrial area, surrounded by chain-link fences and abandoned lots. Vincent's SUV pulled up to the side entrance, and Marcus opened the door. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of oil and rust. Polly was tied to a chair in the center of the room, his face already bruised and swollen. Tony stood nearby, his arms crossed, his expression grim. Boss, Tony said, nodding as Vincent approached. Vincent looked down at Polly, who was breathing heavily, his eyes wide with fear. Why? Vincent asked, his voice cold and flat. Polly swallowed hard. They had something on me. My sister. They said they'd hurt her if I didn't cooperate. Who? The feds or the Morettis? Both, Polly said, his voice breaking. I didn't have a choice, boss. I swear. Vincent studied him for a long moment, then turned to Tony. Is the sister real? Tony nodded. She lives in Naperville. Single mom, 2 kids, No criminal record. Vincent looked back at Polly. You should have come to me. I could have protected her. I know, Polly said, tears streaming down his face. I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Vincent pulled his gun from his holster and pressed it to Polly's forehead. The man's eyes went wide and he began to sob. Please, he whispered. Please. For a moment, Vincent stood there, his finger on the trigger, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He had killed before, many times. It was part of the job, a necessity in a world where weakness was a death sentence. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the thought of Polly's sister, a woman who had done nothing wrong but would pay the price for her brother's mistakes. Or maybe it was the memory of Lily, sitting on the floor with her drawings, her silent plea for a world that made sense. Vincent lowered the gun. Get him out of here, he said to Tony. Send him and his sister somewhere far away. Make sure they understand that if they ever come back, if they ever talk to anyone, they're dead. Tony looked surprised but nodded. You got it, boss. As Vincent walked out of the warehouse, he felt the weight of his decision settling over him. Mercy was a luxury he couldn't afford, and he knew it would be seen as weakness by some. But he also knew that he was tired of the violence, tired of the constant vigilance, tired of living in a world where trust was a commodity and betrayal was inevitable. He needed something to hold on to, something that reminded him there was more to life than this. That evening, he took Lily to the diner. It was becoming a ritual now, a small island of normalcy in the chaos of his life. Nora greeted them with her usual warmth, and as she set down their food, Vincent found himself studying her again. There was something about her that grounded him, a quiet strength that he couldn't quite define. Rough day? Nora asked, her eyes flicking to his face. Vincent realized he must look as tired as he felt. You could say that. Nora nodded, as if she understood. Sometimes the world feels too heavy, she said quietly. Like you're carrying something you can't put down. Vincent looked at her sharply. You sound like you know the feeling. Nora's expression shifted, and for a moment he saw the mask slip again. We all have our burdens, she said, then turned and walked away. Vincent watched her go, his mind racing. There was a story there. He was sure of it. And he was starting to think that understanding Nora's story might be the key to understanding why Lily was drawn to her. Later that night, after he had put Lily to bed, Vincent sat in his study with a glass of whiskey. The room was dark, except for the glow of the city lights through the window. He pulled out his phone and called Tony. I need you to look into someone, Vincent said. Nora, works at Rosie's Diner on West 47th. I want to know everything. Where she's from, what she's done, why she's here. There was a pause on the other end of the line. You think she's a problem? I don't know, Vincent said honestly. But I need to know who she is. I'll get on it, Tony said. Vincent ended the call and took a sip of his whiskey, the burn of the alcohol grounding him. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he knew he couldn't ignore the pull he felt toward Nora. She was a mystery, and in his world, mysteries were dangerous, but they were also irresistible. 2 days later, Tony called with the information. Her full name is Nora Hayes, 26 years old, born in Indianapolis. No criminal record, no outstanding warrants. She moved to Chicago about 8 months ago. What was she doing before that? Vincent asked. That's where it gets interesting, Tony said. She was a social worker, worked with kids in foster care, but she quit suddenly. No explanation. Just packed up and left. Vincent's mind raced. A social worker. That explained the way she interacted with Lily, the calm authority she had with difficult situations. But it didn't explain why she had left. Dig deeper, he said. I want to know why she quit. Already on it, Tony said. I'll have more for you soon. Vincent hung up and stared out the window. A social worker who had walked away from her job and ended up working in a diner on the South Side. There was a story there, and he needed to know what it was. Because the more he learned about Nora, the more he realized that she wasn't just a waitress. She was someone who had been through something. Someone who understood pain and loss in a way that most people didn't. And that made her either the most dangerous person in his life or the most important. He just had to figure out which. The truth came to Vincent on a cold Thursday evening, delivered in a manila folder that Tony handed him across the desk. The rain was falling again, a steady drumbeat against the windows of his office, and the city below was shrouded in mist. You're not going to like this, Tony said, his expression grim. Vincent opened the folder and began to read. The first page was a newspaper article from Indianapolis. dated 9 months ago. The headline read, "Social worker injured in domestic violence incident. Child dies." Vincent's blood ran cold as he read the details. Nora Hayes had been conducting a home visit to check on a 6-year-old boy named Daniel Reeves, who had been placed back with his biological father after a stint in foster care. The father, a man with a history of violence and substance abuse, had attacked Nora when she arrived. In the struggle, the father had turned on his son, and by the time the police arrived, Daniel was dead. Nora had been hospitalized with a concussion and a broken arm. The article included a photo of Nora being led out of the house by paramedics, her face pale and streaked with blood. Her eyes, even in the grainy photograph, held a look of devastation that Vincent recognized all too well. He flipped to the next page, a police report that detailed the incident. Nora had tried to protect the boy, had put herself between him and his father, but it hadn't been enough. The father had been arrested and charged with murder, but the damage was done. Daniel was gone, and Nora had been left to carry the weight of his death. The final page was a resignation letter, brief and formal. Nora had quit her job 2 weeks after the incident, citing personal reasons. There was no forwarding address, no indication of where she had gone, until she showed up in Chicago, working at a diner on the South Side. Vincent closed the folder and leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. It all made sense now. The way Nora interacted with Lily, the calm authority she had in difficult situations, the pain he had seen in her eyes. She had been a protector, someone who had dedicated her life to keeping children safe, and she had failed, just like he had failed to protect Elena. "What do you want to do?" Tony asked. Vincent looked up, his expression unreadable. "Nothing. She's not a threat. You sure about that?" "I'm sure," Vincent said. "She's just trying to survive, like the rest of us." Tony nodded slowly, then stood to leave. "If you say so, boss." After Tony left, Vincent sat alone in his office, the folder open on the desk in front of him. He thought about Nora, about the weight she must be carrying, the guilt that must haunt her every day. He thought about Lily, who had somehow sensed that Nora understood her pain in a way that no one else could. And he thought about himself, about the choices he had made, and the life he had built, a life of violence and control, of power and fear, a life that had cost him the woman he loved and left his daughter locked in silence. For the first time in years, Vincent felt something crack inside him. Not a breaking, but a shifting. A realization that the walls he had built to protect himself were also the walls that were keeping him trapped. He picked up his phone and called Mrs. Chen. "I'm going out," he said. "I'll be back late." Then he grabbed his coat and headed for the door. The diner was nearly empty when he arrived. Just a handful of customers scattered throughout. Nora was wiping down tables, her movements slow and methodical. She looked up when he walked in, and her expression shifted. Surprise, then something else. Wariness, maybe. "Mr. Kane," she said, "I wasn't expecting you tonight. Is Lily with you?" "She's at home," Vincent said. "I came to talk to you." Nora set down the rag and crossed her arms. "About what?" Vincent gestured to a booth. "Can we sit?" Nora hesitated, then nodded. They sat across from each other, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The diner was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. "I know about Indianapolis," Vincent said finally. Nora's face went pale, and she looked away. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Daniel Reeves," Vincent said gently. "I know what happened." Nora's hands clenched into fists on the table, and her jaw tightened. "You had no right to dig into my life." "You're right," Vincent said. "I didn't. But I needed to understand. My daughter, she's been through something terrible, and for some reason, she feels safe with you. I needed to know why." Nora looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Because I failed," she said, her voice breaking. "I failed to protect a child, and he died because of me. And every day, I wake up, and I remember his face, and I wonder if there was something I could have done differently. So when I see Lily, when I see that pain in her eyes, I recognize it, because I carry it too." Vincent felt something tighten in his chest. "It wasn't your fault." "Yes, it was," Nora said fiercely. "I was supposed to keep him safe. That was my job, and I failed." "You did everything you could," Vincent said. "You put yourself between him and his father. You risked your life. That's not failure. That's courage." Nora shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "It doesn't matter. He's still dead." Vincent reached across the table and took her hand. She flinched, but she didn't pull away. I know what it's like to carry that weight, he said quietly. To feel like you failed the person you were supposed to protect. My wife. She died because of me. Because of the life I chose. And my daughter hasn't spoken since. So I understand. More than you know. Nora looked at him, and for the first time, he saw the full depth of her pain. It was a mirror of his own. A reflection of the guilt and grief that had shaped both of their lives. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because I think you're the only person who can help her, Vincent said. I don't know why, but Lily trusts you, and I trust her instincts. Nora pulled her hand back and wiped her eyes. I don't know if I can help her. I couldn't even help Daniel. You can try, Vincent said. That's all any of us can do. Nora looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, she said. I'll try. Vincent felt a weight lift from his shoulders, a small glimmer of hope breaking through the darkness. Thank you, he said. As he left the diner that night, the rain had stopped, and the city lights reflected off the wet pavement like scattered stars. Vincent felt something shift inside him, a sense that maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward, a way to heal the wounds that had been festering for so long. And it started with Nora. The next 2 weeks were a blur of tension and escalation. The Morettis, sensing weakness in Vincent's organization after the betrayal, began to make their move. Shipments were intercepted, warehouses were raided, and 2 of Vincent's men were found dead in an alley on the north side. It was a declaration of war, and Vincent knew he had to respond. But even as he coordinated his counterattack, his mind kept drifting back to the diner, to Nora, and to Lily. He had started bringing his daughter to see Nora more often, sometimes twice a week. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Lily was beginning to change. She still didn't speak, but there was a lightness in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a sense of connection that Vincent hadn't seen since Elena died. Nora, for her part, seemed to understand what Lily needed in a way that no therapist or doctor ever had. She didn't push, didn't demand. She simply sat with Lily, drawing pictures and sharing quiet moments, creating a space where the little girl felt safe enough to just be. Vincent watched them together one evening, his heart aching with a mixture of gratitude and fear. He was falling into something he couldn't control, a vulnerability that terrified him, because in his world, vulnerability was a death sentence. And then, everything fell apart. It happened on a Friday night. Vincent was at a meeting with his lieutenants, planning a strike against the Morettis, when his phone rang. It was Mrs. Chen, and her voice was shaking. Mr. Kane, you need to come home, now. Vincent's blood ran cold. What happened? There were men. They broke in. I hid Lily in the safe room, but they're still here. I can hear them. The line went dead. Vincent was on his feet in an instant, his gun already in his hand. We go, now. The drive to his penthouse was the longest 15 minutes of his life. His mind raced with worst-case scenarios, each one more horrifying than the last. If the Morettis had Lily, if they had hurt her, he would burn their entire organization to the ground. He would make them suffer in ways they couldn't imagine. When they arrived, the building's security was already down. 2 guards lay unconscious in the lobby, and the elevator had been disabled. Vincent and his men took the stairs, moving quickly and silently. By the time they reached the 32nd floor, Vincent's heart was pounding in his chest. The door to his penthouse was ajar, and he could hear voices inside. He signaled to his men, and they moved in, guns drawn. The scene that greeted him was chaos. The furniture was overturned, the walls were pockmarked with bullet holes, and 3 men lay dead on the floor. Mrs. Chen was huddled in the corner, her face pale and streaked with tears. And in the center of the room, standing over the body of a 4th man, was Nora. She was holding a kitchen knife, her hands shaking, her clothes splattered with blood. Her eyes were wide and unfocused, and she looked like she was about to collapse. "Nora?" Vincent said, his voice barely above a whisper. She looked up at him, and he saw the terror in her eyes. I heard the noise. I was coming to bring Lily her drawing, and I saw them. They were going to hurt her. I couldn't let them." Vincent crossed the room in 3 strides and took the knife from her hands. "Where's Lily?" "Safe room," Nora said, her voice trembling. "She's in the safe room." Vincent handed the knife to Tony and ran to the safe room, his heart in his throat. He punched in the code, and the door swung open. Inside, Lily was curled up in the corner, her arms wrapped around her knees. Mrs. Chen must have gotten her there before the attack. "Lily," Vincent said, kneeling down. "It's okay, sweetheart." "It's over." Lily looked up at him, her eyes wide and filled with tears. And then, for the first time in 2 years, she spoke. "Nora," she said, her voice small and trembling. "Where's Nora?" Vincent felt his heart stop. "She's here, sweetheart. She's safe. She saved me," Lily said, her voice growing stronger. "She saved me." Vincent picked her up and carried her out of the safe room. Nora was sitting on the couch now, her head in her hands, her body shaking with silent sobs. When she saw Lily, she looked up, and the relief on her face was palpable. "Lily," Nora said, her voice breaking. Lily reached out, and Vincent carried her over to Nora. The little girl wrapped her arms around Nora's neck, and Nora held her tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You saved me," Lily said again, her voice muffled against Nora's shoulder. Vincent felt something break inside him, a dam that had been holding back years of grief and pain. He knelt down beside them, his hand on Lily's back, and for the first time since Elena died, he allowed himself to feel. Tony cleared his throat. "Boss, we need to clean this up, and we need to move. The Morettis will know their men failed." Vincent nodded, his mind already shifting into survival mode. "Take care of it, and get us somewhere safe." As his men moved through the penthouse, cleaning up the evidence and securing the area, Vincent sat with Lily and Nora, the three of them huddled together in the midst of the chaos. And for the first time in a long time, Vincent felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. The safe house was a modest 2-story home in a quiet suburb outside Chicago, far from the violence and chaos of the city. It was the kind of place Vincent would have never considered before. Ordinary, unremarkable, safe. But now, as he stood in the kitchen watching Lily and Nora make pancakes together, he realized it was exactly what they needed. 3 weeks had passed since the attack. The Morettis had been dealt with, swiftly and decisively. Vincent had made it clear that anyone who threatened his family would pay the ultimate price, and the message had been received. His organization was stronger now, more united, and his enemies knew better than to test him again. But Vincent had also made a decision. He was stepping back. Not entirely. He would never be able to walk away completely. But he was delegating more, trusting his lieutenants to handle the day-to-day operations while he focused on what mattered most: Lily and Nora. She had stayed with them after the attack, at first out of necessity. She had nowhere else to go, and Vincent wasn't about to let her out of his sight. But as the days turned into weeks, it became clear that she was more than just a temporary fixture in their lives. She was family. Lily adored her. The little girl followed Nora everywhere, chattering away in the halting, hesitant way of someone learning to use their voice again. She talked about her drawings, about the pancakes they were making, about the birds she saw in the backyard. And every time she spoke, Vincent felt a surge of gratitude so profound, it nearly brought him to his knees. Nora had given his daughter back to him. She had done what no doctor, no therapist, no amount of money could do. She had shown Lily that it was safe to speak again, that the world wasn't just a place of pain and loss. And in doing so, she had saved Vincent too. "Daddy, look," Lily said, holding up a pancake shaped vaguely like a heart. "Nora made it for you." Vincent smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that felt foreign on his face. "It's perfect, sweetheart." Nora glanced at him, her cheeks flushing slightly. "It's a little lopsided." "It's perfect," Vincent repeated, his eyes meeting hers. There was something between them now, something that had been building since the night of the attack. It wasn't just gratitude or shared trauma. It was deeper than that. It was understanding, connection, the kind of bond that forms when two people see each other's scars and choose to stay anyway. Vincent didn't know what to call it yet. He wasn't sure he was ready to, but he knew it was real. After breakfast, Lily ran outside to play in the backyard, and Vincent and Nora sat on the porch watching her. The morning sun was warm on their faces, and the air smelled of fresh-cut grass and blooming flowers. It was a far cry from the steel and concrete of the city, and Vincent found himself breathing easier here. "She's doing so well," Nora said softly. "I'm so proud of her." "You did that," Vincent said. "You brought her back." Nora shook her head. "She brought herself back. I just gave her a reason to." Vincent looked at her, this woman who had walked into his life by chance and changed everything. "You gave me a reason too," he said quietly. Nora turned to him, her green eyes searching his face. "What do you mean?" "I was drowning," Vincent said. "In guilt, in anger, in this life that I built but didn't know how to escape. And then you showed up, and you reminded me that there's more to life than survival, that there's hope, that there's love. Nora's breath caught, and for a moment she didn't say anything. Then she reached out and took his hand. I was drowning too, she said, and you pulled me out. They sat there in silence, their hands intertwined, watching Lily chase butterflies in the yard. And Vincent realized that this quiet, ordinary moment was what he had been searching for all along. Not power, not control, not revenge. Just peace, just family, just love. Later that afternoon, Tony called with an update. The last of the Moretti's operations had been dismantled, and the streets were quiet. Vincent's organization was secure, and his position was stronger than ever. You did it, boss, Tony said. You won. Vincent looked out the window at Lily and Nora, who were planting flowers in the garden. Yeah, he said. I did. But the victory didn't feel the way he thought it would. It didn't feel like triumph or vindication. It felt like relief, like the end of a long, exhausting battle that he was finally ready to leave behind. Tony, Vincent said, I want you to take over more of the operations. I'm stepping back. There was a pause on the other end of the line. You sure about that, boss? I'm sure, Vincent said. I've spent my whole life fighting. It's time I spent some time living. All right, Tony said. You got it. Vincent hung up and walked outside. Lily ran to him, her hands covered in dirt, her face lit up with joy. Daddy, come help us. We're planting roses. Vincent knelt down beside her, and Nora handed him a trowel. Together, the three of them worked in the garden, their hands in the soil, the sun warm on their backs. And as Vincent looked at the two people who had become his world, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: contentment. That evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Vincent and Nora sat on the porch again, watching the stars. The night was clear and cool, and the sound of crickets filled the air. I've been thinking, Nora said, about what comes next. And? Vincent asked. I want to go back to social work, Nora said. Not the same way as before, but I want to help kids again. I want to make a difference. Vincent nodded. I think that's a great idea. And you? Nora asked. What do you want? Vincent looked at her. This woman who had saved his daughter, and in the process, saved him. I want this, he said. I want you. I want Lily. I want a life that's more than just survival. Nora smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing Vincent had ever seen. Then let's build it, she said. Together. Vincent leaned in and kissed her. A soft, tentative kiss that held the promise of something new, something good. And as they sat there under the stars, Vincent realized that he had finally found what he had been searching for all along. Not power, not control, not revenge. Just love, just home, just peace. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Let me know in the comments which part of the story touched you the most, and tell me where in the world you're listening from. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to share more stories with you. Thank you for being here.